I mean, that's a massive financial impact. If you've got a group of 500 people that are working at 30% or even 70% actually, that have lost 30% productivity, that's a massive impact on your business.
100%. And again, may cost you even more because you might need to replace the product again. So instead of asking for that product to last 8 to 12 months, it's now lasting 4 to 6 months if you're lucky, and you've lost productivity, and you might have a down tool scenario where guys have now said, listen, we want something better.
In today's episode of Let's Talk Safety, we sit with Deleane a Rebel safety gear footwear specialist who helps us dive into understanding what companies need to consider when selecting the correct safety boot. A safety boot is not just a safety boot, and compliance is not the only thing we need to consider. When it comes to safety boots, we need to really give thought to what is the job being done, how long is the person going to be on their feet, and what is the application they will be needing those safety boots for. I hope you enjoy this episode, and sign up to our newsletter to get the latest podcast episode and toolbox talk, which would be valuable for you to share with your team on site. In today's episode of Let's Talk Safety, we're going to dive into the subject of foot protection. I'm really excited to have Deleane with us. I've learned a lot from Deleane over the last, say, 12 years. She's got a really good wealth of knowledge regarding safety in general, but foot protection obviously being today's topic. Along with that, Deleane represents Rebel Safety Gear. I mean, we've got a phenomenal trust in Rebel Safety Gear. How we perceive Rebel is when we are advising customers to use a Rebel Safety Gear product, we understand that the quality is going to be there. We understand that the safety is going to be there. We are very confident from the point of when that person uses that foot protection, they will be safe. I'm quite interested, Deleane. Thanks for your time, number one.
Pleasure.
How do you see Rebel as a fit-for-purpose safety provider?
I think Rebel, for me, having worked with them for so many years, and the products that we have speak for themselves. Fit for purpose, whether it is a traditional industrial safety boot right up to your premium welding heat protection safety boot, really does work for fit for purpose. The quality aspect is phenomenal. I mean, there's safety boots and then there's safety boots and then there's Rebel. So that's how I would sum it up.
And I think that's quite accurate. I mean, again, we know there's probably not going to be any challenges when we've gone with a Rebel product due to quality, due to it not performing how it is meant to perform. What we do see, though, is quite often businesses see safety boots as almost a commodity that there's a one-size-fits-all. I've perceived that from engaging with customers that are selecting a safety boot. They almost have a view that I can get one safety boot and it's going to cover my whole site. What is your thoughts on that? Is that something you see, and do you think that is the right approach?
One size doesn't fit all. And I think that's where a lot of companies go wrong. A big thing for us that always comes up is it certified? Products are certified, they're compliant 100%, but that's only the very, very first point. It's not the finishing point. It comes down to fit for purpose in terms of what are you actually doing? What is your role? What is your function in whether it's in the workshop, whether it's in the welding section? And normally procurement will get given a mandate, that's the product we're going for, and that is everybody. And that's actually incorrect, because someone working in one section of a warehouse, for example, and is not outside and is actually grinding, should actually have different footwear. So one boot for fitting the whole team doesn't really work because of different elements that individual is doing in his day-to-day running of his work that is required.
So let's use that as an example. Let's say we are part of a construction, we're engaging with a construction company. If they came to you and said, I need you to assist me with safety footwear, how would you approach that? What is the most practical way for you to assist them in getting the correct fit for purpose solution for their different people across that site?
have a look and see from section to section. And 9 times out of 10, as you're walking through the section, you're picking up a lot of other stuff as well that may be not, in the right application either. But when it comes to footwear, there's inconsistencies. So what boot they tell you has been issued, half the products aren't even what the staff are wearing. We then say, right, that's section A. Then you walk into the next section where there's a completely different application. And that application, there's grinding, there's welding. And again, they're wearing the very same product that was worn in the previous section. You might even go outside and the guys are now drilling and grinding and welding, for example, and they're wearing the exact same shoe as the guy that was in the first section.
So it's not a blanket approach of this is the boot that serves construction. It is more, let's understand the application in which that boot is being used. And by taking it from that point, you're more likely to get a proper safety boot spec.
100%. I mean, construction is general, but within a construction site, you have many different applications. You've got guys that are going up onto scaffolding. You've got guys that are grinding. You've got guys that are pouring and mixing cement. You cannot just take a blanket approach. So yes, there might be a one boot fits all kind of vibe, but it's not going to, in the long run, actually service that site correctly. More importantly, the individual, because that is who we're actually protecting at the end of the day. They have a job to do. They have a site to build or building to construct, but the individuals doing the work need to be kept safe. And I think that for us is the most important within the realm of fit for purpose.
100%. And I mean, again, I can echo that. That's how we experience Rebel. That's why there is such a good relationship. There's something interesting you mentioned where you said what they are supposed to be wearing is not what they are wearing. Give me an example of that. How do you mean?
So often what happens is procurement, let's say, get given a mandate. This is the product that they've decided to go with. I'm not going to say maybe that it's the cheapest product, etc. And it gets to the stores, it's been issued, and the guys push back. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't fit for all in terms of one guy's complaining that it's too tight. One guy's complaining that it's not padded on the one side. Another guy might be complaining that his feet are sore from the long shift, etc. They then sometimes tend to go back to their old shoes or their previous boots that they've worn maybe for a year or 2 years back. And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Or they've gone out and they've purchased their own pair of boots because they find them more comfortable, being that it has more comfort features, it is more durable, it might have a different sole, which then also starts to create problems because it's not what was on the general issue.
So am I right to say that when the user declines the product which was given, is it a thing that, and our audience is generally going to be safety officers, procurement people. I just want to open that conversation from is it that the user is being difficult, or is it that by approaching it with a blanket approach, we've probably given them a product which isn't designed or specific to their need?
I would probably say that it's not that it's a blanket approach. It's it is a blanket approach, should I say, that it hasn't been given to their specific need. If your safety officers generally will know what they're looking for. However, they also are led by a site assessment of what they need, but they might have missed something. It's very important that the boots that are issued are chosen correctly and are fit for purpose. And I use an example. Let's take a construction site where a stock standard boot has been issued. However, there's a lot of raw bar, there's nails, there's metal shavings, and there's no anti-penetration steel midsole in that product. And no one will know that because you can't see it to the general eye. And there is an incident on site and a nail has gone right through the product. What then?
Yeah.
What then? That is where you're saying, okay, but Why wasn't that taken into account? So you've now got a product that is certified. You've got a product that was supposedly fit for purpose, but in actual fact failed in terms of that it didn't protect the individual.
Which is why we got PPE. We don't have it because
Correct.
It looks good, right?
Correct, 100%.
Although it can look good.
It can look good. And yes, it does. It does take into account. The other side is the comfort side of it. A lot of guys are wearing that product for 8 to 12 hours for the shift.
Yeah.
He's only gets given one pair.
Yeah.
And it's raining, it's wet, it's muddy, etc. And they're expected to wear that product all the time.
Something, it's a crazy concept for me is, and it's a bit off of this, but I think it gets to that same point. People spend a ridiculous amount of money on their personal shoes. They then understand as well that if I use that shoe too frequently, it's going to get damaged. However, if my safety boot does not last me and I'm wearing it, like you've just said, for 8 to 12 hours a day, and sometimes on the weekend to church, sometimes to play soccer, and we then get frustrated that the safety boot's not right. However, if you did that with your normal shoe, that wouldn't be in a good condition, would it?
No, not at all. And I think it is slightly off, but what the interesting thing is that a safety product or a safety boot complies to an international footwear standard, which has probably more than 200 tests that it has to go to in order to meet that standard.
Yeah.
Your average shoe, your normal pair of lace-ups or tackies, etc., don't.
Yeah.
And they don't get the hammering that they do that a safety boot is there to do.
Yeah.
So, and then that comes down to, again, the quality, because you will then get given, in terms of mandatory PPE, let's say you get given 2 or 3 Conti suits, one in the wash, one to wear, and, one ready to go. But you get one pair of safety boots. And that boot is expected to last the same amount as durability as a Conti suit, etc. And it doesn't get given the care, and the comfort factors aren't taken into account for that.
I think there's a critical point there that we need to emphasize, that when it comes to PPE, the safety boot is probably the product which is worn for the longest period.
Correct.
Consistently, because like you've said, Conti suit we change out. Earplugs, I know that I've got reusable, they're going to last me a week or however long that is. That's a really critical point, and the care of that, right?
100%. And I think the other side of it is that your foot injury is one of your longest healing time injuries on site. If you get a foot injury where you twist your ankle, etc., you're in an ankle boot, you can't come to site. So, that also then is downtime and out of production. Where if a Conti suit tears, or you have an arm in a sling, yes, you can come to site and they might put you onto admin. But a foot injury is really, really hard to work around in terms of time and production.
Sticking to the example that you gave of that construction site, what are the considerations that a person who is selecting a safety boot, if they don't come to a Protector or a Rebel, what should that safety person or the hygienist be considering when saying, this is the safety boot we require for this application on the site? Are there certain things they should be thinking about?
100%, definitely, because of where that application is. So the questions we ask is, or should be asking is, they're working with cement, they're working with water, they are working with are they working with chemicals? All those things need to be taken into account before we say, right, what do we look at? What do we have? What are they currently using is a big one, and what problems they're experiencing in terms of, because the product they have may be correct, but there are housekeeping issues that may be also interfering with the longevity of that product, which is also something that we find often that happens because it's a company issued product. No care is taken.
Yeah.
And for example, let's take concrete. If you don't if you mix water with concrete, it's just going to sap up all that water, and that's exactly what happens with leather. If you don't clean those boots are going to crack. Doesn't mean that the product is inferior, but it's the actual application and housekeeping care guidelines that need to be taken into account for those boots as well. But it's very important that your safety officer goes through and says, right, what am I looking at in this area? Why is it not working? Have they changed product? Have they changed an application, or have they introduced a new machinery or whatever it is that's now causing splitter, splatter, etc., that's now affecting, the footwear or whatever it is that they're wearing?
Okay. And I mean, that makes sense. So it doesn't matter how good the leather is, if it comes into contact with certain products, it's going to get damaged if it's not kept in a good condition.
Look, 100%. I mean, leather doesn't like water at the best of times. Quality of leather is important.
Yep.
You get a split leather versus a full grain leather, but it doesn't matter what product it is. If it's exposed to the same elements and it's not looked after, the cheaper the product or the more inferior of the product, it's going to lessen the life of that product straight away.
Okay. So we're talking then, when somebody's selecting a product, they need to consider the external hazards. That might be what the conditions are. Is there cement? Is there heat? Is there electricity, kind of thing?
Correct.
The second thing we are considering is the housekeeping. So are we looking after the equipment? Are we making sure that it gets cleaned, it gets polished, right?
Correct.
What about the point of use? Meaning, you touched on it earlier in your earlier point, but how long we're using the product, does that affect anything?
It does. I mean, in an ideal world, you would say, let's issue 2 pairs of boots. One to wear today, one to air out tomorrow. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen, and we're living in a very much of a real world. Boots are expected to last at least a year. That's generally an annual issue.
Yeah.
However, one pair of boots that is doing that every day, 8 hours, sometimes 7 days a week, it actually really is a long shot to ask for a boot to last as long as that.
Yeah.
However, if it is looked after and it is cared for and it is given the attention that it can last. If it is needed, it should be changed more frequently. And then that comes into the famous price war issue, because your cheaper products don't have the same quality raw materials that have been put in there that don't last.
I wanted to ask you that, actually. So I've seen boots that where the sole is have, it looks like cardboard that are, and I mean, your point is 100%. Somebody is in that boot walking on a daily basis. The reason we realized that was because it actually indented where the person's heel is, because they keep striking it.
Correct.
Why is this boot slightly more expensive and why is this cheaper? Is that the result? I mean,
100%. We'd all love to be driving Golf GTRs, for example, but we can't afford it. And I think, within the realms of budget. But what makes a boot, from a price point of view, everything makes that product the way it is, based on what the components are that have been used. And whether it is 4 eyelets on its lacing system, whether it's dual density in terms of technical stuff on safety footwear, dual density is not just the same dual density from one shoe to the next.
Hold on. Let's jump into that. What's dual density?
Okay, so dual density on pretty much most safety boots and shoes. We talk about PU, or polyurethane, is generally used through pretty much every brand, every safety boot and shoe, as well as hiking boots, for that example. And when we talk about dual density, it has a hard outer layer, which is what hits the ground and is obviously robust and causes the durability when you actually walking. And then your second layer, which is your inner layer, which is what you don't see, is your comfort factor and your cushioning between that and an actual footbed that then starts the construction of the actual boot itself. So often you will find that the quality of the inner PU is not the same from boot to boot. Some boots have what we call plugs, which may be made out of a foam. For example, your EVA foam with the pluckies, which is in there, which most people don't know anything about because you don't see a cross-section of a boot or a shoe.
Yeah.
But dual density, most shoes are dual density. However, you do get single density boots, and the outer layer, the first dual harder outer layer, is sometimes very, very, very thin. Even though it states it's dual density, it may be very, very thin because of cost components.
So am I understanding it properly that when it starts becoming a cost conversation, sometimes what you don't see is something that will affect you in the long run, being the inside of the boot, and that's where people can save on their manufacturing, which makes the product look more appealing. But what's the risk for the person buying that?
The risk for the person buying it is that they don't know what goes on in the components, in the inside of the components. For them, it's about the budget. They need to comply according to occupational, health and safety laws that they need to make sure that they are compliant. They're providing the product. However, if the product that they have purchased is a cheaper product, and the dual density of their product is of poor quality, the layers of that from a comfort point of view, that will create the fatigue, that will not wear very well from the outside. Those things will start coming up pretty quickly as the individuals are wearing them all the time, versus maybe a slightly better quality and a more expensive product that would last longer because it has more superior PU, for example, or a better leather, within the product that is in the raw material side of it. And no one would see that.
Yeah.
You put two pairs of boots on the table, no one will know what actually goes on the inside of the components of the product. They're looking at the price tag.
Yeah. And because they look like the same from the outside,
they think that they will do the same job.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they don't.
No. Very, very clear on that. You mentioned creating fatigue. What do you mean by creating fatigue?
So I think it's like we said, certification and product quality, are your first and foremost, and is it a certified product? But a very, very, very important part of a general worker's everyday thing is the amounts of hours that they spend on their feet. Whether they are in a kitchen, whether they are in a construction site, whether they are in a laboratory, 9 times out of 10, they're on their feet. Fatigue is caused so quickly by what is actually made up on the shoes or the footwear that they're wearing. A lot of complaints when we do site assessments are, geez, my feet are burning, my lower back's sore. Geez, I don't know why, but our feet are really, really sore after today. And that when you start breaking down what footwear they're wearing, and if you had to take that boot or shoe that they're wearing and cut it in half and actually see what's going on inside, those are the contributing factors that actually lead to fatigue. So, for example, if a product has got what we call a plug in the heel of the outsole, which is in your heel section. I've actually got a cutaway of a product when we talk about dual density and we talk about product. And these are the two layers. So you've got your softer inner layer, and this is your hard outer layer. And when we talk about a plug, it's normally got, which literally looks like a square or a plug within inside the dual density section of the heel. And a big part of fatigue is that if it does have that, and with compression, we all know what our slip-slops do when we've worn them forever and ever and ever. They compress with time because your heel of your foot is what takes most of the pressure while you're standing. And as that compresses, so that compresses within the actual boot and shoe. So your heel becomes lower than your toes, or for example, in the ball of your foot area. And with that, you start compensating without even realizing it because you don't know what's going on in it. And that starts to cause fatigue because you now start compensating within the way you're standing. Your back gets sore. And with that, you then start looking at if someone is tired at their workbench or at their work area, do they then start making a mistake or whatever because they're now thinking, geez, my back is so sore, my feet are burning. It can happen.
Yep.
And they don't realize that it may be the footwear that they're wearing that has caused that fatigue.
There's a very critical point that I think needs to be highlighted even further is when something is being sold at such a cheaper price, there's always a cost. There's always going to be some sort of it's the whole apples with apples thing. And the problem is that if you look at these boots in front of us, you can't tell that. You've got a cut up which you can see that's a proper PU sole. But if you don't have that, the problem is the person that's complaining, the poor guy that got the boot or the poor lady that got the boot, they're the ones that are going to end up being injured, that are going to end up suffering potentially permanent disability in a way. Like you said, if you're overcompensating, your body will naturally start damaging itself to try and make it feel better. And then you take the shoes off and then all of a sudden you're walking a bit limp. And that happens because people are trying to save money on buying a cheaper boot.
Correct.
That's a very big problem.
It is a big problem. And in our economic climates, it's very difficult to say, no, we're not saying that you must go out there and go and buy the most expensive product that you can to get the best possible thing. And that often also happens where guys will go to the nurse or the doctor and ask for a better product because they've got an injury, etc., etc. That is different. But what we're saying is you pay for what you get.
Correct.
And it's not like for like. So when you're buying something for, and I mean, I'm saying it, we sometimes sit there and think, how can this product actually be bought for that price when it's there to save my foot, or it's there for a reason, it's a safety product? How did it actually get there? The natural thing is every single component adds to the cost of that product. It doesn't have to be the cheapest, but I can get something better still within my budget. Then I know that my individual that is wearing it can actually, have a decent day's work. And something as small as a footbed that can be added to the product can add a bit of extra comfort to that individual for the day.
You even mentioned the eyelets.
When we talk about eyelets, we're talking about D-rings, your lacing system.
But that's a couple cents.
That's a couple of cents, but every single solitary cent counts. Every single solitary cent counts. The leather counts. The lining counts. The quality of the PU. The amount of the size of the plug that is used. It's still a boot. But all those tiny little elements are what bring the costs down. And unfortunately, that's why people are able to get the products down to that price point where they are.
And now my point on that is exactly there. So it's a couple cents. What's the difference if you've got 2, 4, 5 eyelets there? What if I take one of them away? Because I'm saving a bit of money. I'm going to sell it cheaper.
Saving it for a bit of money, and it sounds silly, yes, but 5 eyelets versus 4 eyelets, for example, actually interferes with the tension or the tensile strength across your metatarsal area of your foot. Because if you've got 5 eyelets, for example, on a boot, you've got more flexibility when you walk. So it sounds silly, but one set of extra eyelets adds to the flexibility of when you're actually walking, where 4 creates more tension and doesn't allow that amount of flexibility.
Okay, so now we've spoken about the eyelets, we've spoken about the plugs. As you've explained, it influences the productivity, right? Because if I'm not in a good state, if my feet are sore, if I'm not comfortable, am I as productive as when I am fresh and when I actually am extremely comfortable?
No, you're not. And bearing in mind that you may be a general worker or a tradesman that's working specific, you've also got a safety officer that is doing over 15,000, 20,000 steps a day that also has fatigue. And if he gets given the blanket, same safety boot as the rest of the general workers, because that does happen too.
Mm.
So again, comes back to fit for purpose and what can I afford to actually put my worker or my safety officer or my manager into when they're on site.
Yeah, I'm more interested. So it's 100%. So when it comes to a blanket, that's not an option. But people that are making the decision, I think, need to understand when I'm saving a bit of money because I've got one less eyelet, when I'm saving a bit of money because I don't actually know what's in the sole, but it's really cheap, probability is there's a plug, or what effect does that have for the business? I mean, that's a massive financial impact. If you've got a group of 500 people that are working at 30% or even 70% actually, that have lost 30% productivity, that's a massive impact on your business.
100%. And again, may cost you even more because you might need to replace the product again. So instead of asking for that product to last 8 to 12 months, it's now lasting 4 to 6 months if you're lucky, and you've lost productivity, and you might have a down tool scenario where guys have now said, listen, we want something better.
Yeah.
You've also got an individual that is sitting in procurement that is doing the buying. He doesn't have to wear those boots.
Yeah.
You know, and that comes into the equation as well, and the education.
How do we change that? I mean, that's a really, it's important.
It's important, and I think it is. It's you have to have your safety officer there in terms of making sure that you have your correct risk assessment done, that you know what is it that individual or that section is requiring. Procurement needs to know about that as well, and obviously your financial guys need to know from a budget. I mean, PPE in general is always a grudge purchase. Yep. But unfortunately, guys don't realize just how important footwear is in terms of head-to-toe PPE, because you're standing all day.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at occupational footwear and you look at I always say to the guys in a kitchen, you don't see a chef sitting. You don't see a guy in a construction site sitting.
Yeah.
They're working. They're on their feet. Constantly on their feet. So education is key, and making sure that the right product has been selected for the right section, you know, and hence code of conducts are important to be written. Listen, you are in that section. That is what you wear. Mm. That's the footwear that gets issued. That is why you get that boot issued for that section.
I must say, I've got a very soft spot for the people that are responsible for these on site. I'm lucky to have come from a base of fall protection. That's all I had to worry about. I could learn that, and I could figure it out, and I could understand it to a really good understanding that it's a bit easier to apply the need to the application. The guys that are setting this up, that are responsible for setting the standard, they're not just setting the standard for the boot. They're setting the standard for the boot, the Conti suit, the glove, the hearing protection, the helmet. There is not a chance that they can have as much knowledge as you do, because you spent a lot more time just focused on this. Aside from that, this is one component, right? PPE is one component. Then they need to know about tools. Then they need to know about all these other factors. How does Rebel help people like that?
So I think that, you know, that's where the expertise comes in terms of, we see this all day, every day. Yes, you're setting the standards. That's in a laboratory tested environment. But when you have a team of guys that are going to site, they're doing site assessments, they're working with the safety officers, they're working with guys they have a problem that needs to be resolved. You have to get those teams involved. And I think Rebel is strong in working with teams on the ground and saying, listen, yes, you're working with that product. There's nothing wrong with that product. However, the correct product to give you longevity and durability is product X.
Yep.
You know, and this is what you should be looking at. Yes, but it's more expensive. Yes, but how many times has that product had to be replaced, and the individual that's wearing the product? So it's more of a holistic looking at it. Yes, that's the certification. Yes, that's the product that we're looking for. However, this is this is an incident that's happened, or this is a constant issue that we've seen that is appearing on your site. Let's put a wear trial together and let's see that this product can actually now fix the problem that you're having before you outlay a full staff complement of 500 people.
Yeah.
And that's how close that we will work with the individuals to say, is it working? What's working? And that's often how product is born.
Yeah.
Or education is actually shared with those individuals. Oh, we didn't know that. And it's important because there are a job to be done, a budget to be met, an individual that needs to get paid. But unfortunately, the end user at the end of the day wearing the product is the most affected by all of those decisions that need to be made.
And at the same time, that person that's most affected affects the final result the most.
Correct.
Because if we drop in productivity, the final results, I mean, how many times is construction not hitting a timeline? Is
Correct.
this why?
Correct. And then you have your lost time injuries, your LTIs, which is something that no site wants to go to.
Yeah.
But it is. It's a very, very, very real thing. And like I say, the more that companies get involved with the OEM that actually are the specialists in it, and actually just share the information and share the knowledge and educate. This is our speciality.
Yeah.
We're not specialists in bricklaying or smoldering and doing welding and that kind of thing. But you need to know the elements that will protect you for the duration of while you're doing your job.
Thank you for joining us, and I hope this episode added value to you. If you are experiencing any safety challenges on your sites and require any additional information, please do leave us a message on LinkedIn via Protector Safety Gears page, or alternatively follow the link below and share a message with us, because maybe it can create value or valuable conversation for future episodes. Be sure to also follow us on LinkedIn. There will be some valuable information shared from today's discussion.